Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Pop-Up Traffic Gardens as a Versatile Community Tool. My name is Amelia Neptune. I'm the Bicycle Friendly America Program Director for the League of American Bicyclists, and we're really excited to welcome you to today's webinar. The inspiration for this webinar is that the 2020 National Bike Summit, which was originally going to be held in March in Arlington, Virginia, was going to have a really amazing pop-up secret garden, including a traffic garden and a lot of other tactical urbanism features organized by Fionnuala Quinn. And obviously, since the summit was canceled, we weren't able to have that wonderful in-person experience, but Fionnuala has been generous enough to offer to do this webinar for us instead and recruit a great lineup of speakers for you today. So we are very excited to be able to offer this webinar, not as good as the in-person pop-up traffic garden would have been, but this should hopefully help a lot of communities develop your own pop-up traffic gardens and similar resources in your community, especially at this important time to get more people outside and active. Today's webinar is being recorded, and for those of you attending live, you can submit questions via the chat box. If you're watching the recording later, thank you so much for being here. I will start by introducing Fionnuala. All right, Fionnuala Quinn became an advocate for better streets through her work as an engineer and her local bike advocacy roles. She set up Discover Traffic Gardens to create unique child-centered design programs that facilitate the installation of permanent traffic garden facilities. I'm really excited to welcome Fionnuala to speak at this webinar today, and really grateful for her work organizing the speakers and other panelists today. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Fionnuala. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be able to have a chance to talk about traffic gardens today. They really are a wonderful tool for the community. They're just something that everybody loves as soon as they see them, and they really engage children and really get them moving and thinking about bigger ideas. Before we start, I just want to do some definitions. What is a traffic garden? It's a small network of streets, child scale usually, although they can be scaled for adult bicyclists who are learning to ride. It's an idea that originated in the US in 1937. On the left, we're looking at Mansfield, Ohio, the first safety town, as it was originally called. And a police officer came up with this idea to help teach children about roadway safety. Instantly became a hit, and the idea has been within the US ever since. And if you look at the photo on the right, that's 2019. It's almost the identical photo. It's a set of miniature streets with young children learning how the streets work. The devices have changed, but almost everything else is the same: signs, streets, road markings. So these permanent facilities are going in various communities and serving as a tool for biking education and roadway safety education. Today, we're actually going to talk about something, a subset of traffic gardens, which is temporary traffic gardens. Traffic gardens that are installed for maybe a day, a couple of days, in connection with some sort of event or purpose. So, and that's a very specific application that I'd like to sort of zoom in on because of its value in so many different ways. So I'm going to talk about 3 specific pop-up projects that I worked on that all worked differently, and then I've got 2 others I want to mention at the end that are of another type. The first project is Open Streets DC last fall as part of their huge Open Streets event where they closed Georgia Avenue, and they had many thousands of people spend the day doing all sorts of activities. I installed a pop-up traffic garden on one of the side streets for the Department of Transportation. It was something I came up with the design. We worked together. If you'll notice, it's only one side of the street so that emergency vehicles could still go through if needed. But we made this little universe on the street. It got installed right after the public street got closed in the morning, and was open in time for the Open Streets event. It was fully busy the whole time. Children coming by with their families, onlookers. We provided a little bit of instruction about how the streets worked, road safety education, and it was an extremely popular piece of the Open Streets event. And I want you to take note before I move on of that green artificial grass. I will mention that. So one thing about any traffic garden that I really like to embed into it, and it's really an opportunity, is it's a straightforward idea to grasp. Children are drawn to them, families are drawn to them, but you can go so much further than just using them. It can lead you into the bigger, more important conversation, which is how do we design our streets? So again, at Open Streets DC, seized that opportunity, and we had families all doing DIY design next to the activity. Again, these installations, they live for just a short amount of time. They actually take a lot of work to install. I really rely on volunteers helping me out to get them in and to operate them on the day. And that can be used as a great community building event. At this particular event, I had all sorts of planners and engineers from the Department of Transportation, all working hard, installing this mini traffic garden and helping kids on the day. So it actually helps bring everybody in closer contact, thinking about, how children use facilities, how we, design things, and it becomes a real bonding sort of occasion. And very often they are, they're community events where there's a lot of different organizations involved. So, and at the end, everybody has a great time and everyone's very happy. So they're a real bringing together of people about these important conversations about our streets. So project number 2, different type of temporary traffic garden. In this case, this traffic garden was installed in a courtyard inside of a public school in DC. Sorry. I was holding a 3-week transportation themed camp for children it was in connection with an immigrant organization in DC where the parents were in parent college and the children were busy during the day in the camp while their parents were in their classes. So over the course of 3 weeks, we looked closely at the streets in the neighborhood, and children came up with the design, and we made everything, and we created this amazing world inside this school. And even though it's a temporary facility, even though it's short term, as with all successful facilities, you need to do planning. And usually in my case, it's a design drawing, but, and it can be a schematic, but, you need measurements, you need layouts, you need to consider how things work. In the case of the children, it was a model that they worked on over a period of time. Traffic gardens are a great way to involve people in building, making stuff, coming up with creative ideas, particularly with children. Just the pride of building something. It's actually not that common for people to build something that goes into public use and that they see other people using. And it's a very powerful thing to see other people use something that you made. Even though it may be a temporary facility, even though it may only live for a few hours, always celebrate everything, these creative community-based projects. Every traffic garden can have its own ribbon cutting, but it's a moment to stop and again talk about things, talk about all the people who are working together, talk about the work that was done, talk about your plans for the future and what you want to see. It can be a real place to stop and recognize good ideas and good plans. Here we are, after we cut the ribbon on that traffic garden, lots of guests and, children showing off their work, which is always amazing. But something else came out of this. And again, this is something that's very powerful about pop-up traffic gardens. They are also a demonstration to other people in the community about permanent installations. I can see several people in the photograph who are directly involved in the subsequent plans for permanent traffic gardens in DC. Once people see the idea on the ground, it can be a real impetus for saying, oh, we really want something permanent. We can, kids love this. This is very doable. So it is a powerful tool for getting permanent installations. So project 3, another totally different type of pop-up. I mentioned the DC traffic gardens. So George Mason University has been the leader on that project. 2 permanent traffic gardens have gone into 2 elementary schools in DC, and they are doing fantastic research in connection with those projects. Curriculum was developed, it's being delivered inside the preschool, and the research is looking at how does it translate from the preschool into actual use of the traffic garden, what the children are really learning and applying in the field. What this pop-up was we set up a a small traffic garden for the day at a preschool over at George Mason campus. And what the George Mason University research team were doing was testing their methods of collecting information from children. The children were being wired up and wearing microphones, and they were being filmed, and they had to wear a little device with the battery. And so it was a tool to test out something bigger that we were trying to do. As with any of my projects, over in the far corner, you can see there's children working at tables with the idea of DIY traffic garden design. So it's always an opportunity to talk about these other ideas. And what was interesting was what came out of that, because things always seem to come out of traffic gardens, was later I got word that 2 sisters who were present went home very excited and designed and installed something similar on their driveway. And out of that idea came the whole idea of, making kits for children so that they can do this at home. So that they can, there's always asphalt, whether it's in the park, your neighborhood. It's a very powerful thing for children to design and build stuff and then use it and see other people use it. So I did say 2 more pop-ups I wanted to mention. We had planned to install the secret pop-up traffic garden at the National Bike Summit, and there were other things. We were going to have a demonstration street, and but what this was going to be, besides again, another fun pop-up traffic garden, this was really planned to be something else. It was planned to be a place to hold conversations about how we use the tool of traffic gardens, to impart the information to the people. We were going to have many speakers impart the information to people at the summit about how to do this, and hold discussions about, well, what can we use these for? What can we do in the future? And by demonstrating and being in the field, the hope was this would lead us to other ideas and move this conversation forward. So again, sort of a tool for getting people together, talking, having ideas. And my last pop-up I wanted to mention. So, we ended up at home, and plans changed. And what I've been doing is every Saturday, I install a very small pop-up traffic garden in front of my home. Now, this is not a public street, so it's very lightly traveled. And I just go out, spend a few hours installing my new design, and it captures families as they come through. It's a surprise for the children, although many people now know there will be a new and differently laid out traffic garden each week. So what's great about this is it's giving children, that experience of, riding their bike in this little set of streets. And also it's demonstrating sort of a new form of play where you don't have to touch anything, but you can still be imagining these, a world where, you can be having fun. I'm trying to build up a stock of templates for that, and hopefully we'll be able to distribute those in the near future so that other people can be inspired to do this in their neighborhood. So this was supposed to be a handout at the National Bike Summit. It's just marking all of the traffic gardens that are in the DC region now and listing the temporary traffic gardens that we've seen in the region. So, and there's an interrelationship between them. The permanent facilities, in many cases, were either inspired by the pop-up that's listed on the left, or the pop-up came out of the permanent facility in some way. So there's this interesting sort of relationship between these conversations and just sort of bringing out these ideas. We have asphalt all over our communities everywhere. These are small scale. There's so many applications and so many ways to put them into the communities. So thank you. Thanks for taking time to listen today. Feel free to reach out to me and check out my photos on social media, and delighted to keep this conversation going.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Fionnuala. All right. Mary Butcher received her master's in planning from the University of Virginia in 2015. Her thesis was on the holistic approach to bike education for kids based on a European context. She now works for Torti, Gallas and Partners as an urban designer. Not only does she get to do her master's planning and placemaking, but she has brought her love of traffic gardens to their firm. She's completed 5 traffic garden designs within the DC area and looks forward to working on more in the coming years. So with that, I will hand it over to Mary. Thanks, and take it away.
Thanks, Amelia. And we'll jump right in. So as Amelia said, I studied at the University of Virginia, and I'm just going to tell a quick story about myself and kind of what led me to not only be working with traffic gardens, but also to be able to collaborate with Fionnuala Quinn. So I was studying and trying to find a distraction from studying and came across the street film short about the traffic garden in Utrecht. And I was fascinated by it. I was blown away, and I was extremely jealous, thinking, why didn't I get to go to one of these when I was a kid? So it was just such an amazing video. And if you haven't had a chance to see it, I highly suggest it. It's the Street Films production. But one thing at the end of that film, there was a guy talking about what he does now, and he doesn't bike at all. But he went to one of these traffic gardens. He had education in biking, but he doesn't bike anymore. He drives his car mostly. But he understands what it's like to be a cyclist on a busy roadway because he went to the traffic garden. He experienced that. He biked around on the streets when he was a kid. But he said something that really stood out to me. He says he has a respect for all users of the road. And I just thought that was such a profound statement. And because of that video, because of that statement, I decided to write my master's thesis on bike education based on a European context, which was a great experience. But before I leave the idea of respect, I want to talk about it in context within the US. So we talk about Vision Zero, we talk about engineering, we talk about education, we talk about enforcement, all of the E's, we know this. But I think one thing that's missing from all of that is this idea of respect. I think we need to be talking more about respect for all users of the road. And just a little fun fact, the girl driving the car, I actually got to meet her when I was doing my research in the Netherlands when I was over there. So this here is Fionnuala Traffic Garden. Again, I'll be mostly talking about pop-up, but before I get to pop-ups, we did permanent traffic gardens, and those led us to some elements in the design that are helpful for the pop-up traffic gardens. So Fionnuala Traffic Garden, I worked with Fionnuala Quinn before I was at Torti Gallas, and so I started this project with her before TGP, and thankfully TGP, when I said, hey, I love traffic gardens, we should do more of these, we should do them here at this firm, they not only said that's a great idea, they celebrated it and have given me the space and the opportunity to continue doing this work. So this one here, like I said, it's permanent. One of the things you see up here, there's a railroad crossing. This is really important to the town, and I'll talk more about those elements that are important to communities when designing traffic gardens. Another traffic garden we did next is DCPS. So as Fionnuala was talking about, we have the DC Public School System's traffic gardens. We have Aton Elementary and Neville Thomas Elementary School. Here you see the students working on the traffic gardens, designing them, building models. We worked with George Mason University and Fionnuala's Discover Traffic Gardens group when we were doing this project. Fionnuala creates these great opportunities for kids to show us their designs and explain, not only for them to show us, but also to understand what goes into design, what goes into the functions of a street network, how to build street networks, how to stand up and have a voice about their own street networks, even though they're kids. And that my boss, Rob, you can see him in the background on the picture on the left. We were part of these charrettes. We spoke with students. We saw them draw. We saw them create. We learned some elements that they really wanted to have in their designs, like they wanted to bring the traffic garden into the school. While we couldn't paint the schools, we did get to have a traffic garden lead up to the school's door. So these were really useful to us. Here's just some shots of Aton Elementary School's ribbon cutting. It's always fun to see the kids out in the site. These were preschoolers on their Strider bikes. And then we have Neville Thomas. They had the second graders also out there on the site using the program or using the playground. So those three traffic gardens led us to the list you see on the right-hand side. These traffic gardens were all permanent. The image on the left side, that's Aton Elementary from aerial shot. And we worked throughout the entire process. We worked with educators, parents, students. Fionnuala collected a lot of data and a lot of interviews, spoke to a lot of people. We looked at the lesson plans. George Mason has been doing research. We have a lot of understanding of what they needed on the site. And that really led us to this list you see on the right-hand side. And you can see the two columns. We have simple, we have complex. The idea behind that is maybe you don't have a lot of space, you don't have a lot of money, especially if you're doing a pop-up, what are some elements that are usually seen on a traffic garden, like the crosswalks or a four-way stop, a roundabout, or maybe you have something more complex, like a lake, for example, that the kids wanted. We found this tool to be very useful when talking to clients about when they ask what is a traffic garden. We are able to give them this list and say, these are elements that you can see in traffic gardens. The list is also very useful for pop-up traffic gardens. It makes the process go a lot faster with the design process, and we're able to get really down to that nitty-gritty details of what they really want to see in their project. So some questions, I'm looking at this all from the design perspective, and so some questions we ask ourselves when designing these are how much space is available and what are the challenges of that particular site? You may have a site that has like the pop-up traffic garden we did with Kensington. You may have a site that has a house in the middle of it. So what do you do with that? Also, is it permanent or temporary? Who will be installing it? Are they professional painters? Are there volunteers? This is really important. If you have a pop-up garden for a day, you don't want to spend a week painting it. We spend about a day. There's a lot of prep beforehand. Fionnuala's done a lot of test sites, as you saw with her presentation. But we spend about a day putting in the traffic garden for a temporary site. If you have professional painters, you may make something that's more complex versus volunteers. You may not have the ability to do something as complex. Also, what are the programs and lessons already in place? What do they teach? What are those challenges? Going back to that list, what are elements that you want to see in your design? What challenges must be in place? So maybe there's a bridge and you want to have a bridge, or maybe there's a railroad track in the town. You really need to teach the kids how to stop and safely cross that railroad track. Also, are there unique characteristics for the road network in the town? For example, a roundabout. Maybe that's something you see a lot of in your town and you want to make sure kids know how to actually go around one. And finally, what are some elements that can be added just for fun, for whimsy? For example, with the DCPS one, we added a Loch Ness Monster to one of the sites, and the idea is that the kids within an art program would paint that Loch Ness Monster in. So on to some pop-ups. This is Kensington, the Kensington pop-up traffic garden. We worked with Montgomery County Department of Transportation, Discover Traffic Gardens, and the Friends of Warner Circle were actually throwing the event. Fionnuala and I got involved with the program because Pat Shepard of MCDOT saw us speak at a conference at Walk Bike Place in New Orleans and loved the idea and suggested to her friend from Warner Circle that they needed a traffic garden. And in the end, the traffic garden was one of the main events at the one-day event. So this one was done with chalk. As you can see on that lower hand drawing down here, you can see some of the halo effects of the chalk dust. They have signs, and Fionnuala ran an event there. We had a bike rodeo. We had Montgomery County police cyclists come out. It was a big event. It was very successful. We also from then were asked by Montgomery County to do another event, also with the Discover Traffic Gardens being there as well. This one was Dwan Morris. This sadly has been postponed because of all that's going on right now. But as you can see, we were going to have the same things as Kensington had. So the bike clinics, bike pump track, vendors and food and traffic gardens. And again, the traffic garden was the main event here. And because we didn't get to put it up, I at least have the drawing. We got to design it. This is actually what we would go out to site with. And I happen to be a scenic painter in a past life, and that comes in really handy to do these traffic gardens. We had spoken with somebody from Burtonsville, Maryland, who did a pop-up traffic garden there, Sebastian, and he suggested using tempera paint, which is what we were going to attempt using. It lasts a little longer than the chalk, but you don't have that fear of, oh my gosh, is it gonna rain on us and wash away everything. And it sounded like the process goes a little faster, so we were able to make something a little bit more complex. So to wrap up, a couple things. Traffic gardens are a great educational tool for teaching kids how to navigate the city streets, how to respect all users of the road, but also how to become good citizens and how to look out for not only themselves, but others around them. And one more story before I go. At the Kensington Traffic Gardens, there was a dad who came up to me. I was just talking to some of the parents and hanging out with the kids, watching them bike. And he said, that the traffic garden was great because he bikes with his kids all the time. They bike on multi-use paths that run through the woods and other trails, and they don't really cross over streets. So he never has the opportunity to explain to his kids what a traffic sign is, what it means, what to do when you come across one. And he actually was able to use the pop-up traffic garden at Kensington to teach his kids those lessons. So it was great to hear. And that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mary. I got several requests while you were speaking for the Simple Complex page. People wanted to be able to print that out. So we can share these slides out as PDFs. And if people want to contact Mary directly for maybe the original, if you don't mind, please feel free. Her email is up on the screen. So Allegra Williams is an urban planner, educator, and advocate for kid-friendly streets and public places. Her background in community-engaged design and her experience revitalizing abandoned and underutilized spaces has fueled her interest in traffic gardens. She sees them as a unique tool for bringing about change. So thanks so much, Allegra, for joining us today, and I'll hand it over to you now. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And can everyone hear me okay and hopefully see what the presentation? Good.
Yep, looks great, thanks.
So thank you so much, Mary and Fionnuala. So much of what I'm going to talk about is really been inspired by your work. So thank you. So I just want to do a little bit of an intro about Local Motion, so Vermont's bike and pedestrian advocacy organization, and the Livable Streets program, which I was formerly leading there, which led to some of the pop-up work that I'll talk about. So Local Motion is statewide bike ped organization. We run a range of programs from valet bike parking, almost 100 events a year, to educating thousands of students and adults in bike education, to the Livable Streets work that I will talk about. And that is really sort of a combination of advocacy, bike and pedestrian planning, and technical assistance to municipalities, schools, and local organizations. And one of the main resources that we use, that we have used, is the pop-up demonstration trailer, which is essentially a trailer that travels to different towns, to different schools, providing resources for tactical urbanism projects. And typically over the course of a season, spring, summer, Local Motion would assist with about half a dozen of these projects, anything from bump outs to pop-up bike lanes, and really could be one day sort of festival type events to larger scale, longer term pilots. And so in 2018, Fionnuala came as the keynote speaker for Local Motion's annual Safe Routes for All conference. So Local Motion is sort of the de facto Safe Routes to School coordinator in Vermont. And there had been a lot of interest when she presented and led a workshop on traffic gardens. And we had thought, well, maybe we should have some of these materials for pop-up traffic gardens available through the trailer like we do for other pop-up types of pop-up projects. And so I'm going to talk about the pop-up project that we designed and created with partners in Rutland, Vermont, which is about 2 hours south of Burlington, where Local Motion's based, as part of the Green Streets event there. And it's sort of a unique story. It grew out of some work we were already doing in Rutland, particularly with a private school and a teacher and group of students who had been concerned about the drop-off routine and about safety and lack of safe routes to their school. And so it was an interesting project that they had already reached out to us about doing as a pop-up, redesigning sort of their drop-off routine and streets around their school. Many of you are probably familiar with Ian Lockwood's cartoon and sort of the irony inherent in that. So this is the road actually adjacent to the school that the students were advocating to the city to address safety concerns around. And so the picture I showed you previously was actually the middle school students going to the traffic advisory committee and asking them to have permission to redesign the streetscape. And so it was a great partnership with the Regional Planning Commission, with the Vermont Energy Education Program, with the city, a local mural artist, and many others to try out this pilot. And so that led to a number of other sort of relationships and initiatives. We helped lead a couple of commuter education workshops. We helped support, the RPC had really led the effort to launch a region-wide, county-wide bike walk advocacy group. And schools were interested in learning from this really inspirational story of these students to do other work in their school system. So there's a lot sort of in motion already that led to us deciding to build this pop-up traffic garden at Green Streets. And it was really a great collaboration, both with a lot of the students we'd worked with already and VEEP, as well as the RPC, but also with new partners like the Parks and Rec Department, who provided the bikes and who had a number of students build the sort of cardboard houses that we used with Come Alive Outside, who donated sod. And so there are a number of partners involved. We also, Local Motion offers an e-bike lending library and also a traveling e-bike lending library, including cargo bikes for individuals and families who are interested in potentially trying out an e-bike before deciding to purchase one for their commute. And so we had e-bikes available to demo before the lending library was launched in Rutland. So there's sort of a number of different things going on. And the traffic garden helped, bring people in and help them get involved with some of these other initiatives. And so you'll see, a number of, unlike sort of an open streets event in Burlington where, families are used to the event, they understand it, many of them are advocates themselves. A number of people at the Rutland Traffic Garden, where there isn't that culture of walking and biking yet, had never heard of a balance bike, had never even been on a bike. So, it was important to sort of know the audience, have things in place there to have the traffic garden be successful, and to be ready to help introduce people to the concept of it. And also really to have students sort of leading, right in the center of things. Many of the middle school students who were sort of dressed up and helping people understand how to use a rotary or rules of the road were people we'd worked with in the past. And, there are middle school students who'd never ridden a bike who were trying out a bike as for the first time as part of the traffic garden. So it was sort of a way to equalize things for them. And, especially now as we think about, with so many schools closed across the country and sort of the demand for kid-friendly places and streets more important in some ways than ever, I think it's important to be thinking about the traffic garden and many of the other offerings Fionnuala has developed and what role they can be playing for us now. And so hopefully we'll have a chance to talk a little bit about that and some other things. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I believe now we have a few minutes for our three panelists to join together on a pop-up podcast. And I wanted to jump in and just make sure our audio is working with you, Fionnuala, because early on we had a lot of problems. Can we just do a quick test?
Yes, hello.
Okay, I hear you. Hopefully attendees do too. Great, I'm gonna hand it over to you guys. I'm getting reports that attendees can hear you too. Great, take it away.
I'm glad we have a few minutes to have our little podcast, our pop-up pod. Because the three of us have worked together, and we know that these projects are great because they're always they're new, it's new ideas, things we're trying. But now, we've had this little pause where our world is changing, and we're going to come back with all these newer ideas. And we know from how we've used this in the past that people love engaging with traffic gardens, but it could be so much more. So I'm going to throw out one idea. I want to see what you guys think and see what other thoughts you have. Somebody earlier in the week said to me, well, what about a temporary traffic garden where we're going to use our space differently? People aren't going to go to work the same number of days. Maybe they're driving 4 days and they're off 3 days. And now we've got these big parking lots. And those parking lots can be used in a different way. The parking lot would be transformed into a traffic garden for the time that it's not in use as a parking lot. The specific case was actually on Parks and Rec property, I believe. So there was already a park next door to it. So I thought this is a really different take on temporary traffic gardens. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's an interesting idea of our new take on park sharing, sharing parking. I'm not saying that right, but we all know share parking situations. So, we're like, oh well, there's the office building, and we can have an entertainment center or something in the evening, and that parking lot can be shared. Or there's a residential area and we have folks leaving for work, and so now they can park here during the day for the office. So it's an interesting take on some existing infrastructure that is now all of a sudden potentially going to have a new use. And Fionnuala, I remember at some point you were talking about the idea of asphalt. What is a farmer's market, right? And that idea, it's just a piece of asphalt. So that is the same thing as this, as you were saying, and what an opportunity to then maybe you have this traffic garden that's there 4 days a week, and then maybe a farmer's market pops in. So when you're popping around the farmer's market, then all of a sudden you have a place for your kids to hang out that's safe and enclosed. And another beautiful thing about those parking lots is they're already, one of the issues that we find with these sites is we want to make sure we're enclosing the kids, right, that they're not able to run out into the street. We're working on a design now for a park that's right along a small road. It'll be, on both sides, 25 miles an hour, but we still want kids to be able to play there. But these parking lots are already built in for that separation. So I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, Allegra kids, they're all stuck home now.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think people are thinking of all kinds of creative ways to, make do with kind of the space they have given social distancing, or repurpose underutilized spaces in ways that are safe. And especially, thinking about some of Fionnuala, your other activities and tools and kits, STEM focused educational activities that can maybe be used inside for now and then eventually be sort of incorporated into things schools are doing when they reopen, or more of a homeschool context. Yeah, there's a lot of need for that now.
Yeah, that could be all busy designing right now.
That's right, and we can then take those designs and put it and implement a traffic garden after all of this.
No, I want to just issue them all with chalk and some templates. Just mail them all out right now. So anyway, I mean, the whole idea of reusing asphalt for different things, we didn't really talk about all the sort of tennis courts and basketball courts. And Allegra, that place we went to see in Burlington, there's a lot of these empty spaces that kids can't really use right now just because there's nothing there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think right now it's particularly challenging just with so many playgrounds closed. Can you really offer something in the next month or two that, depends on what the sort of protocol is locally, I guess, but, on a smaller scale, like in your driveway or right on your street, or even activities inside, seems like, and then in the longer term, obviously, yeah, it would be great to be repurposing.
I'm calling it flat playground, the no-touch flat playground, because that's really what it is. And yet, for children, they see it in 3D. They're seeing it as having more because they're imagining a world. Otherwise, they wouldn't follow the lines if they didn't see something more there. So anyway. So great. Well, maybe we open it to Q&A from our audience.
Great. Yeah, we are getting a lot of questions, so people are really excited about this topic. I'll start with an obvious one that we knew was coming, but what are the sources of funding that you think most successful to pursue for getting permanent traffic gardens built? And then a second question that was asked that I thought was related, can you give a sense of cost range for materials for temporary traffic gardens?
That's sort of a couple of different questions. I'll start with some of mine. For temporary traffic gardens, I keep the supplies in stock. Most of the materials that are used are, duct tape, spray chalk, cardboard, and other things like the grass that I already have in stock. So it's actually only a couple $100 for the materials for that particular event. Most of the work is not in the materials. Permanent traffic gardens, what was the question again? Because they're a whole other thing.
Yeah, I think the real question is, what are the most successful sources of funding to pursue if you're looking to build one?
These have been everything has been hyper-local at this point. For the DC projects, we received a Vision Zero, or George Mason University received a Vision Zero grant because that the Department of Transportation was offering, but then, the facilities were installed in the school. A lot of these new facilities, you're not really paying the true cost because you're using existing asphalt, which has everything there. It doesn't really need much added. There's benches, there's access. The cost is in just applying the new surface materials. So in DC, it was a grant. There haven't been any specific grants for traffic gardens, so people have been applying in different ways and, talking about them in terms of health and healthy activity. Mary, do you have some other examples? Sometimes they're just reaching into their own resources because the cost is pretty low. They're using in-house people to install and stuff like that.
Yeah, I know with DDOT in Montgomery County, they actually were able to afford it on their own because it was the pop-ups are cheaper. And we've heard of another group, Hagerstown, Maryland, that used a health grant, for, as Fionnuala was saying, for healthy communities and stuff. And then Fionnuala, I think you had mentioned one about potentially for crime reduction. Was that you?
Yeah, that's something that got delayed because of the current situation, but was something we were working on. It was to do with friendly relationships.
But it could even be an arts grant. I mean, you can become very creative because the traffic gardens do allow you to be, they are, as Fionnuala was saying at the beginning, traffic gardens kind of fit in many different forms and many different ways. So it could be an arts grant, it could be a health grant, a combination, a transportation grant. It's not just about, don't look at it just as biking. And coming from a bike advocacy point of view, I think that's why the bike program in DC was so successful, because it's coming from the school. So maybe it could be built into, if you work with a local school system and really get involved with that, and maybe they're remodeling their blacktop, and that's an opportunity.
Yeah, at least 3 of the recent traffic gardens in our region are related to the remodeling of schools, and it's just sort of buried into the, bringing back the school and the playground.
Great, thanks. What is your experience or suggestions for children with disabilities with various adaptive devices using traffic gardens? We'll start with Fionnuala, if anybody else has experience.
Yeah, in the case of DC, we're working with the programs that they had there. So certainly, and they're teaching biking education to the children. So, they were considered in the design, but the design, because it's a flat blacktop, it's not really restricting what they're already doing right now. We haven't really had opportunity to work in any more advanced situations than that, because we're not actually running the traffic gardens. In the public situation, they're just wide open to use by whoever shows up, and they really generally don't have inbuilt barriers. And try and make them as friendly and open as possible. Part of when I'm holding a pop-up event, I remind people that we may have children with different mobilities, and make sure people are prepared. And also when I'm working with the school on doing design, get in touch with the teachers beforehand to know exactly about the children within the groups that will be there, whether they have any mobility issues, so that we focus on them. And then of course, in my own hands-on materials, I have, I use Playmobil figures who use wheelchairs, and I have cutouts of children in wheelchairs and stuff like that. So, we're trying to build it in as much as we can, and certainly not forget. I also, because we actually, when you get the opportunity to talk to children about design, of course, we always talk about all ages and all abilities. And in several situations, I've had children come up to me and take me aside and say something like, my dad uses a wheelchair. And I always feel like perhaps it's not something they normally say, but they've suddenly found a place to touch. And then I usually say to them, well, then you're an expert on this design topic, and we'll sort of go off on that. So they certainly are hearing something there. So it's certainly a built-in consciousness, but that's about where we are at this point.
I want to point out one more thing, Fionnuala, off of what you said, is that compared to, as you showed, compared to the original model of a traffic garden, those had streets and gutters and all those things. And while it is really cool to have that, having it just paint on the asphalt really opens it up so you can go outside of the line if necessary, to make room for those adjustments on the fly. So.
Great. Another question, how have you been able to get community buy-in from marginalized communities whose voices often are already neglected in urban planning? I can start with Fionnuala again, if you're willing.
Well, I mean, all of the work that I'm doing is involving voices in design. I think I'm reaching people who've never been invited into the topic before. And I think most of the children who I've worked with would probably fall into those categories. And it's actually wonderful because when you do this kind of stuff and you start calling what you do design and inviting important people in and inviting, you know, local officials and the mayor, you actually create these opportunities for children to have a voice. So it's actually, it's been a huge feature of what I've been doing. And I've had mayors turn around to the, local mayors, from the mayor of DC, turn around unprompted saying things like, oh, well, you know, we're going to make sure we're going to take everything into account. And I'm thinking, great, you got what we're trying to do here. So we always build in, you know, there's a city hall. We use the correct, even though things are fun, we use the correct terms and say, oh, this is your public input and you're giving it at City Hall. We were recently working on a traffic garden design in City Alexandria. And we set up a city hall. We had a mayor. She spoke English and Spanish. And it was someone who was a former mayor in a different community, but very much talking to these children about these ideas and promoting the concept that yes, they can give input. They should be able to give input, and here's how you do it. So yeah, it's really a great medium for that sort of stuff.
Great, thanks. What, in your eyes, are the biggest things that need to happen to ensure that pop-ups maximize their potential for a lasting effect? And I think especially considering pop-ups that want to become permanent, or at least to inspire a community to install a permanent version. What are the most important components for that?
I want to say recognizing that that it does take time. And you do have to invest something into it, and whether it's a little bit of money and a little bit of a lot of your time. I think Fionnuala, out of all of us, can speak to that, and going into that knowing that it will take a lot of preparation, but it's worthwhile. And in any event, I don't know if Allegra and Fionnuala can say this too, but I feel like they can. Any traffic garden event that I've been part of has been a huge success and has gone on to the next one and the next and the next. They're a great hit. And, you know, we don't, like with the Kensington Circle, it wasn't supposed to be the main event, but it became the main event. And then the next one they wanted to do, it was the main event. So, but putting forth that preparation beforehand and knowing that it's not just paint on the ground, that you do have to make a conscious effort to think about what will be useful for the kids to learn from and to have fun as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think data collection is really important for pop-ups generally, you know, the before and afters, the bike counts, the usage, just demonstrating through surveys or other means that there's public demand. And in, you know, the projects we worked on with young people who have really been the ones leading, it's real, you know, it's hard. Nobody's going to say no if middle school students come to the city council or, you know, whatever body it is, and demand something. And so that is something I think we've learned through a number of projects as well, that when young people want something, it will happen. It's more likely to move along more quickly, even though it will take a while.
Like there's sort of a gateway method of getting people to see something and talk about something and bring people together and have a very easy success. But then you sort of move on into these other ideas. They work that way.
Great, thank you. So unfortunately, we're at the scheduled end time for the webinar. So I'm afraid we're going to wrap it up there, but we do have a lot of unanswered questions. So I'm going to try to get these out to speakers and respond to folks individually if we can, with specific answers to your questions. And if you are a National Bike Summit attendee, there's also the new Summit Hub that we just launched last week for registered attendees to continue the conversation. So I know this webinar was open to the public, so not everybody has access to that, but if you're in lieu of the in-person summit experience that you were expecting here in DC last month, we've got that online space where we encourage you to continue the conversation. And For everybody else, I hope this inspires you to have a pop-up garden, traffic garden in your community. Please feel free to reach out to us if we can help answer more questions inspired by the webinar. I feel like we could have a follow-up webinar. There are so many great questions that came in. So again, I really want to thank our speakers and Fionnuala, especially for organizing this great session and recruiting these wonderful speakers. I really appreciate your time and expertise to all three of you, and your flexibility in shifting to the online format. Thanks so much to our attendees for joining today, and we look forward to seeing you at future webinars from the League, and hopefully at a future National Bike Summit, and one that involves a pop-up garden. All right, take care everybody, have a great day. Stay safe and healthy. Bye.